You are now listening to the A Dose of Disruption podcast, powered by Experian. Weekly compelling conversations on making money moves and growing your network. The place where you can learn to be you and do you all at the same time. I'm your host, Shelly Bell, and now, let's see what this week's Level Up looks like. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, and it's time for the Shelly Brief. Okay, so this last week, I was on Fox Business, right? And it's Varney Co, specifically that show. And it was really great. Now, this was one of the first times I had gone to a studio, but sat in the studio and was looking at a camera. So, like, I'm sitting in a room, and there's nobody there in the room but me. And I have an earpiece on and just me and a black camera in front of me right now. I have this nice backdrop of the Capitol behind me. And so it looked way different. If you saw the clip, it looked different than what I was actually experiencing. Because all I could hear was him talking, but I couldn't see anything. Now, what's hard about that is you don't know how to really react. So keep in mind that, these things are usually done in person. Or I've done them over Skype. Before, when you do them live, they usually do them over Skype, which is interesting. They don't usually do it when you're on TV and they do live. It's usually over Skype. But it was a great conversation. But he tried to get me to say that we should reopen. He was like, "Yo, what do you think about reopening?" I'm thinking, I don't think it's a question of should we reopen or not reopen. I mean, we all know that reopening is inevitable. So I'm like, we need a plan. So he's like, because I'm like, well, you asking Black businesses to take on the liability of somebody getting sick. And he's like, shouldn't you just have liability insurance? And I was like, yeah, but now you're asking people who have taken a loss to then buy into insurance that they may or may not ever use. But then they may have to use it. And then if they do have to use it, they still got to pay out deductibles and all that. So it was just really interesting though, because I'm proud of myself because I feel like I did the political thing, which was don't really answer the question, but kind of just give them enough to make them ask you something else so you can not answer that question either. I felt like that's what I was good at doing that day. But our guest for today is awesome and works for the eBay Foundation. I was so excited to chat with her. She's been huge, Black Art Ventures did receive a grant from the eBay Foundation, but she has just been a wealth of resources and knowledge all her own, and can't wait for you to hear her. Her name is Allie Ottoboni, and yeah, stay tuned. Here we go. All right, here we go. I am so excited to have you with us today, Allie. How do I pronounce your last name correctly? Because I don't like getting names wrong.
I appreciate that. I say it Ottoboni. If we were in Italy, it would be much more beautiful. You can go with Ottoboni.
Okay. Allie Ottoboni from the eBay Foundation, and I'm so excited to jump into this conversation. But first, one of the questions that we always ask on A Dose of Disruption is, you could be doing anything in the world. You could be a sailor. You could be operating the stoplights. You could be weaving baskets. You could be doing a number of things. Why are you working with and directing the eBay Foundation?
Well, thank you, Shelly, first for having me. I have to say that I have been listening to all of your recent podcasts. I want the podcast where you and I just get to talk about the other podcasts and the other guests that you've had on, because they've been amazing. So thank you. I'm learning a lot through you. Well, we're just going to jump right into my nerdiness then, and it really comes down to belonging and empathy. So I firmly believe that volunteering, giving, philanthropy, if it's done well, it has the power to change each of us, and it can change the way we think about issues. It can change the way we show up for people. It can change our own beliefs. I'm happy to just start with a personal story that continues to motivate me every day. Volunteering is kind of one part of what the eBay Foundation focuses on. So throughout eBay, we have thousands of employees around the world, and part of our work is how do we connect each of them to meaningful giving and volunteering opportunities? So a few years ago, I had a chance to volunteer with a group called Defy Ventures. And if you're not familiar with Defy, they're a national nonprofit organization. They work with people who are in prison, and they provide them with entrepreneurial training. Now, for most people who are in prisons, getting a job upon release is just not a possibility. So entrepreneurship can be a really interesting bridge and an opportunity for them to be able to create income and really have a future upon release. So I had the chance to drive from my home in San Jose to Chowchilla. If you're not familiar with that part of the world, it's heart of Silicon Valley to basically the heart of the Central Valley, where a lot of our food is grown here in the state. So it was the first time I'd ever been to prison. It was the first time I had ever met anybody who was currently in prison. And we spent an entire day doing everything from resume review and coaching to hearing business pitches and helping further bring out their ideas, to these really deep opportunities for connection and really just seeing each other as humans. And at one point, we're in the middle of this gym, Shelly, at the Chowchilla facility. There's this gym, and we are volunteers on one line, kind of diagonally across from each other. The entrepreneurs in training are on a line just across from us. So EITs are what Defy calls the people who go through their program. And I just had this moment as I'm looking at this line of men, mostly people of color, and it was like my zip code, my race, the community, the socioeconomic status that I was born into just hit me in the face. And it was kind of this breakthrough of, even though I've been on this career path of supporting others, raised in a family where being in service of others is a top value, it was this intense visual awakening to really systems working against some people and then working in favor of others. And so I walked away with these questions to myself of, what is my role in this, and what systems might I be upholding in this? So I walked away, first of all, just desperately wishing that everybody I knew and beyond could have that kind of transformative experience. And really, if we can, what starts to happen is you see that people that we readily give labels to, so in this case, inmates, right? Like you pick up a newspaper, very common to see, you're talking about people who are in prison, inmates. So once we see them as human, as people first, that's where empathy shows up, and that's where we change. And for the people who are now seen, there's this sense of belonging, which is critical for each of us for our survival. It's how we're wired. We need to know that we're connected to other humans in some way and that we're accepted. So I see this ripple effect of what's possible when we really connect. And when we think about volunteering, whether we're volunteering virtually nowadays or in person, let's say we're going to serve a meal at a local shelter, we might just be thinking, okay, we're out of the house, or we're doing this for 2 hours, kind of a transactional experience. But what's really possible is that we're actually opening ourselves up to breaking down barriers of us versus them. So when that happens, there's a shift in our in-groups. All of a sudden, I might feel more responsible for people who I didn't associate with before this experience. There's this awareness and this change within us that's possible. I just want to give credit where credit is due too, because if you're really fascinated and like to nerd out on this stuff like I do, there's an amazing organization called Realized Worth. They consult with all kinds of companies on volunteer programs and beyond, and they are just a wealth of information in terms of the kind of the deeper meanings and the deeper connections that are possible, not only through volunteering, but through how we think of giving and philanthropy.
No, I love that. I mean, so it sounds like, the work that you're doing with the foundation could also be like a part of your portfolio of your life's work. Like if you were to think about it, like what your portfolio of your life's work would be. What were you doing prior to being at the foundation? Like
Yeah.
how have you seen this arc over time that has led you to feeling this way? I mean, this awakening is there, but a lot of times there's like different times throughout our life where like there were we just were always engaging,
Yeah.
whether we acknowledged how we were volunteering or being
Yeah.
active or not. So I wonder, like, do you see this as like your life's work, like purpose? Um,
Yeah.
and what were you doing before now?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, I was never somebody who felt like I could be in a role or have a job that truly just felt like a job or felt like I was collecting a paycheck. I came out of college, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I had to be doing something that felt like it was meaningful to other people and it was providing to other people. Um, Prior to this role, I was working still within philanthropy. I was working for a family foundation in San Francisco for a number of years. And then I also worked on the nonprofit side, pretty fresh out of college. But I would just say, Shelly, like, I was the nerdy kid who was saving up my allowance. I was like the target audience for the Nature Conservancy and like the swag bags they were giving out. Like I went to the body shop when the Until There's a Cure bracelets came out. I still have mine. And this whole concept of like, wow, you actually have a lot of power in how you spend your money. And whether that's a direct
Hmm.
donation or that's a product that you're purchasing that is supporting someone else, I was just like hooked from a very young age of that power that each of us has, whether you're working within philanthropy or nonprofit. I think it's still all available to us. So I really loved that connection of um, the impact that all of our choices can potentially make.
I love that. And so some of our listeners are not familiar with the family foundation world or like
Yeah.
even certain levels of philanthropy. And I've found that there's a slightly different language
Oh
there
yeah.
when it comes to like how you speak the language of philanthropy or like
Yeah.
how have you seen any of that evolving like
Mm,
over the last 5 years or even maybe just because of the pandemic. The pandemic makes us feel like, hey, nothing happened between 2020. I mean, before
I know.
2020. Before 2020,
I know.
it might as well not even have existed because it should no longer be dictating anything that we're doing now that
Yep.
it all has been disrupted.
I know.
But I think one of the things I'm always talking about is like in philanthropy, when somebody says, "How can I be helpful?" Like
Mm,
that really means like you're supposed to ask for money. I mean, like
mm,
you wanna round it up with like, here's how you can impact with the money, not necessarily just like give me X amount,
right.
but here's how can I be helpful was a different question for me going into understanding fundraising. Because
Hmm.
if how can I be helpful for someone who doesn't have any capital means like how can I volunteer?
Right.
It meant like how can we give our some of our employees, how can we give you pro bono things? But I got to a point in my journey where I started to recognize that how can I be helpful actually meant that I could say, I would love to be able to engage in da 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 and monitor support of blah.
Yeah. Yep.
But asking for money wasn't something that I was conditioned to do growing up.
Hmm.
So have you seen any evolution around like or heard of any really great efforts? We're gonna talk about eBay's amazing efforts in a second, but um, yeah, have you seen anything or heard anything about like this kind of cultural nuance
Hmm.
around it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much you raised there that we could dig into. I think the two main things are that pop up for me are kind of this language. Is there an evolution in the language? And also, I'd love to just bring up power dynamics. So, one is completely agree with you on this very foreign language within philanthropy, and I think we try to look at how can we be as clear and simple as possible and not use a lot of corporate jargon, to be honest. um, like say what you mean to say, right? And that's both with grantees in conversation, that's with employees, that's on our website. um, I am also, though, because I feel like it's connected, just fascinated by the power dynamics within philanthropy. And I think that's one thing that we've seen, again, getting back to other sources of inspiration, but books like Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva and Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. I highly recommend reading those, even if you're not within philanthropy, because there are so many structural issues that are kind of entangled with philanthropy in general, or our own giving and white savior complex and all of these things that have been in place for a very long time. I think the shift that we're seeing and we're trying to continue to embrace is a shift toward trust-based philanthropy. And that's much more about the conversations with nonprofits that are more like, what do you need? How might I best support you? Whether that's with capital or employee volunteers or whatever else it is that you might be looking for. But also, how can we make reporting really simple? How can we make the application process super transparent? How can we get general, like, unrestricted operating support grants to nonprofits? And so I think that with that shift, hopefully also comes a shift in language, so that it doesn't feel like, if you're new to this world or you're new to fundraising, that it's yet another thing to take on and to work for.
And I would say, firsthand, as a grantee, that you're definitely doing that. I mean, the process was simple. The application was simple. I mean, it was meaningful, right? Like it was very intentional. Like we did have to explain, write out, know our stuff. But you didn't make me do, 25 questions about just so you can gather data points, right?
No.
Like I feel like it was a really smooth, seamless process. So I really do appreciate it as someone who is in charge of an organization, leading an organization, and like having to fundraise and like having to work with our teams to like make sure we get the write-ups done. Some of the applications are getting a bit ridiculous. And I think for us, we have also decided to dial back a little bit. So we're doing like, eligibility around like who we serve and making sure you understand that kind of like in a checklist fashion, but then trying to scale back on like some of the questions that may be great data points, but we're not even using the data points or anything. It's just data points to have. And just being more intentional about like not overtaxing underrepresented founders. So, in the world of philanthropy, also things typically move really slow. How has the pandemic affected like your work at eBay Foundation? But you've done some impressive things to kind of like move actually pretty fast. So how are you managing that, like the need being there and then the need to move in the philanthropy space?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for the kind words, Shelly. It's great to hear that the process was pretty straightforward. I think we're always kind of walking that balance of, you need some rigor behind the process, and you need to gather enough information, but you also are looking out for not making it a burden on nonprofits. So I'm glad that it felt that way. In terms of 2020, early on last year, we just tuned into what everybody was feeling, which is, wow, everybody needs everything. We don't know what this pandemic is going to look like. We have no idea how long it's going to last. And there was a real immediate, palpable, urgent panic and need. So we started by just calling up some of our nonprofit partners, some other organizations that we hadn't yet funded but had been in conversation with. And we truly did start from where you mentioned earlier in the call of just what do you need in this moment? What are you seeing? How might we support you? Like a chance to really just listen and learn. And, I remember the feedback being very real and painful at that moment. And even, just the language was so visceral, like we need cash to staunch the bleeding in the small business community. And that was honest and painful, and it spurred us into action. So, eBay Foundation, we're a corporate foundation. We do have an endowment. And so we were lucky to be in a place where we had funds, and we just made the case to our board that the time was now to get the grants out the door. So it was definitely fast. It was not a perfect process. It was not a process we had followed before, but it was significant. And we invested a big chunk of our endowment basically. In 2020, we did 5 times the dollar amount of grant making from what we had done in 2019. And painful as 2020 was, and as the problems continue to be, this was really an opportunity for us to jump in headfirst to a level of funding and a speed that felt like we were meeting the moment in some way. So it was kind of this, this moment of, and getting back a little bit to decolonizing wealth and winners take all again, but we've seen this hoarding of wealth, right? We've seen it throughout our society. We've seen it in philanthropy, and kind of the standard that I think we've in many ways gotten used to as a society is people kind of parking money in a fund. It's going to sit there, and we're going to spend a little bit down each year, and we're going to feel okay about that. Like we're doing great. That's not where we want to be. So last year was an opportunity for us to clearly state, now is not the time to now is not the time to be saving for a rainy day. It's raining right now. It's raining buckets. And it's asking ourselves, how do we show up? So we focused the bulk of our funds last year on untapped entrepreneurs. That's been a focus area for the eBay Foundation for a number of years. And even pre-2020, we know that people within these groups, BIPOC, women, LGBTQ, veterans, refugees, they are most often left out of funding and networks and connections. So we knew that the pandemic was going to disproportionately affect them, and increasing our budget 5 times was one way for us to show up.
Yeah, and you did that. What are some of the focuses around, or work you've been doing around women entrepreneurs in particular?
Yeah, so I think I was looking at a survey recently, what is recent anymore? I remember the Chamber of Commerce, what does that mean? What is time? The Chamber of Commerce had done a survey over the summer. I don't know if you saw it, Shelly, but it was this focus on, for female-owned businesses from January to July, female-owned businesses who ranked their overall health, the health of their business, not themselves, that would be another survey, as good or somewhat good, fell 13 points during the pandemic. So from January to June, they went from 60 to 47%. Meanwhile, the number of male business owners reporting good business health fell only 5 points in the same time period. So women are going from 60 to 47, men are going from 67 to 62, and that's only January to July. Like, it doesn't even feel, is that data still relevant, right? Because I would just imagine that the situation is much bleaker as we're thinking about the full year 2020 and even well into 2021. So the ways in which we've supported women-owned businesses through eBay Foundation is continuing to have that focus on inclusive entrepreneurship. The data shows that women-owned businesses typically grow at faster rates, but they're continuing to receive less support. So we see an incredible responsibility in supporting women, especially now. Shelly, I don't know if you saw that New York Times article last weekend about the impact of the pandemic just on mothers, but that's probably another podcast we could have. But just the incredible challenges that mothers in particular are under.
Oh my goodness, I did not see it.
Oh, I'll send it to
I'm
you.
gonna have to go. That should be our. I'm gonna have to go take a look, because maybe I'll mention that. Like, I do a segment before this. Wow. Yeah, I will have to go and look at it, because I can't imagine. I was just talking to my mom yesterday, because I went out of town, and she kept my 6-year-old stayed with her, but of course she had to do school. And so my mom's like working from home. She's an accountant, and she's like also she's like, kudos to you. Because I don't think she fully understood until this moment. And she was like, because I don't know how y'all are doing that. And I'm like, that's what I've been trying to do.
Yes. Well, fair warning before you read it, that I'm sure there will be moments where it feels like you're reading your own story, and so there's a pain in that. So just, be very gentle and kind with yourself after you read it.
Okay, I will. I'm hoping to not feel alone. I mean, even though you're not
No,
alone, it's just like it's just ridiculous right now. I don't even know what the future holds. I mean,
I
but
know.
speaking of that, we think about what does the future for the eBay Foundation look like in this inclusive entrepreneurship landscape? There's so much to fight for.
Yep.
There's so many places to choose, so many segments, industries, like so many places to put everything and everyone. What do you think you would zero in on?
Mm, Such a great question. And you're right, there's just so many different ways to go. I think what we have tried to look for, and what I imagine we will continue to do, is the different pieces of the entrepreneurship puzzle, right? And so continuing to look for partners who are looking at entrepreneurship holistically. And there might be some partners who are really focused on providing capital or loans, right? And we know that that's going to be not even continued and increased need. There might be some nonprofits that we're partnering with that are looking at connecting small business owners with each other, providing them with resources, with tools. Navigating government support has been a big area of work for some of our nonprofits. So I think we'll continue to stay within that inclusive entrepreneurship space. I think another thing that we look at is with our employees, and I know Shelly, you and I talked about this early on too, right? Is tapping into the power and the expertise that sits within a large company, and that really connects your employees to why you do this work and why does the foundation show up in this space, and how this is all really a natural extension of eBay's purpose as a company and the whole entire reason for our business existing. So I'm always looking out for those opportunities of, how do we also meet employees where they're at, whether that's through kind of less intensive programs like just supporting their volunteer time by matching that, supporting their own charitable contributions through our matching gifts program, to what is kind of that deeper level of involvement that really connects them to inclusive entrepreneurship. Where are there mentoring opportunities? Where can I connect them with Black Girl Ventures, right, where there's some expertise on our side or some expertise on the Black Girl Ventures side, right? Like, where can we really look for that common ground to work together? So those are things that we're always looking out for and trying to maintain a balance on.
I love that because it sounds like you're gonna definitely be focused on being a true ecosystem player, and I think
That's the
like that
goal.
is yeah, yeah. I think that's phenomenal. Well, I really appreciate you and your time today. Thank you so much for taking time out with me to have this discussion. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with?
I would just say thank you for having me. It's been so fun to just be in conversation with you. And I would just direct back to realizedworth.com, decolonizing wealth, winners take all, great sources of inspiration. And I really appreciate the conversation today. So thanks so much, Shelly. And I can't wait to tune in and hear who you have on next.
Yes. Thank you so much, Allie. Have an awesome day.
Thanks, Shelly, you too.
Thanks for joining us, Disruptors, and congratulations. You have taken another step toward being friggin' amazing. Make sure you visit us at adoseofdisruption.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or via RSS feed. Rate and subscribe if you're all the way live. Rate and subscribe if you're all the way live. That's right. Tell a friend, rate and subscribe to keep us all the way live. Come back next week so we can disrupt some more shit.